What capacity?
Just say who you are, your name.
I'm Edward Seaga.
Right. First, let's talk about how you came to be interested in the musical culture of Jamaica.
In the 1950s, I was involved in anthropological research work, as a result of which I lived in various communities throughout the island, where I did research work, and in so doing, came in contact with one of the richest sources of Jamaican folk music. This was both the music of the religions of the people, as well as the music of a secular type. I recorded quite a substantial amount of this, and on that basis my collection became an invaluable research source of Jamaican folk music. Later on, I had a recording, an album, made from the best of these items, covering the range of material. And it was published by Folkways Music. And that was the basis on which my involvement entered the commercial world.
Tell us a bit about what the range of music covered in those recordings that you made.
The spiritual music covered the various practices that are involved in the spirit cults, having to do with performance at different ceremonies. It's not possible to outline a particular item of music and say that this relates to a particular aspect of a function, because in doing so one would have to explain what that is, and that would get too involved. What I can say is that the music is largely accompanied by drums, or it's accompanied by a rhythm created by guttural sounds that are made by heavy breathing to a rhythm. And those are basically two of the types of musics that are recorded. Now, some of the music that was recorded that has nothing to do with the spiritual world had to do with various forms of practices at work and at play. Work songs, which are practiced when people are in the field, digging holes in a field, for instance, or work songs at construction sites, and ring games, as they are called, when young people and older people play different types of games which are accompanied by music and songs which tell a story. So that the full range was covered in the collections that I have.
Now let's move on to the setting up of Indies Records Ltd. and how you came to do that.
When the album was released from Folkways, like every author, you want to see that it becomes popular. So I took it around to various record shops. And of course it was not the kind of music that one would call popular music. But in doing so, I was asked by the shops whether I could obtain albums and other recordings of a popular nature. And I did this first of all just as a response. But then it became a business because there was a need for it and there were not enough people who were importing popular music. Having developed a thriving import business, I eventually turned to manufacturing because there was in vogue at the time a practice by which recordings on singles that were popular were stripped of their labels and sold as blanks with a new name given to them by persons in Jamaica who operated what was then called sound systems, or what we know as discos or dance halls. And to the extent that each disco operator or sound system operator had an item that was very popular that nobody else had because the blank label didn't allow them to import the original, this increased his patronage. And so it not only increased his patronage, but he could sell copies of it for huge prices. Eventually the price went down and then it was released with the regular label. While that was developing as a practice, I happened to have discovered some of the origins, and as an importer who was not indulging in that, brought in the originals, and this of course made it impossible for you to secure these premium prices on the blank records. So that sort of put an end to that type of practice. But it created a void because the sound system operators, who had a large patronage wherever they played their discos, had to have something unique. And it was for that reason that they turned to local music. So in turning to local music, local composers and local singers then had a chance to show what their gifts were. I came in at that time and had the first local composition that became a popular hit, recorded and produced. It was a record called O Manny O by Higgs and Wilson. Now I didn't do that with a factory that I owned. I did it by having it recorded in a studio and then having it produced by an existing factory. On the basis of the success of that record, I was encouraged to set up a factory of my own. And this was called Indies Records Ltd, or WIRL, which went on to produce several more local hits. Well, just about that time I became involved in the political life of the country and moved away from that scene. But it set the foundation for others to develop other factories and also to take over WIRL and to continue the business of producing local records. Well, as we all know, out of that came the first popular music idiom, the ska, which was popularized in the United Kingdom as the blue beat, and eventually became a thriving musical idiom here for 3 or 4 years. That was eventually succeeded by the rocksteady and then by reggae. Rocksteady was at the time in the mid-60s when Bob Marley entered the scene. I had by that time moved on to become a minister of government, and as a minister I was responsible for cultural affairs, and I was able to do some work in promoting this new beat, the ska, overseas in order to popularize it so that the many artists who have now came on the scene, because once we did the first record, it was almost like an avalanche. The talent just came from everywhere, and records were being produced and compositions were being made and so on. And trying to popularize them, I sent teams abroad to show how the dance was done. I made some agreements with publishing companies for the music, but it was ahead of the time. And what we succeeded in doing then was really just opening the door. It was a door through which people like Bob Marley and Jimmy Cliff, Desmond Decker, and a number of very popular artists, Prince Buster and so on, were eventually to walk into the international world of popular music created from Jamaica.
Yeah, that's fine.
I've got a couple of questions.
You got a couple of questions? Yeah.
It seems that in Jamaica there's a particular phenomena of political parties using reggae music for campaign songs, which seems very particular to this island. Could maybe you elaborate on that for us and give us some examples?
I don't know if it's particular to Jamaica that political parties use reggae music for campaign songs, but it certainly happens here. And it depends on the message. It has been used in the past and continues to be used in the future. Will continue to be used in the future because public meetings here or rallies are affairs of great excitement and entertainment. And to have a rally without accompanying music would make it a rather dead affair. The liveliness of it is part of the reason why the crowds turn out. And music, of course, is the cultural idiom to which Jamaicans respond. So parties have selected songs in the past. Parties have had particular songs written for them. And it has been a practice that has been very successful.
One other question. We've spoken to other people that have been instrumental in the birth of the industry and the culture, namely people like Mr. Coxon Dodd, Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Curry. Have you had any dealings with these people? Can you tell us anything about them? Elaborate on their part in the story?
They were contemporaries. Chris Blackwell followed on my heels in terms of first importing and selling records. And when I moved into political life, because I did this only for a short time relatively, the field was wide open to him, and he continued, and he developed a thriving business in this respect. And as local music came on the scene, he was in a position now to help promote local music, whereas I had moved out of the field. And he went on to England, where the music was gaining a reputation internationally, mostly among Jamaicans and West Indians there. But coming fresh out of Jamaica, he was in a position to enter the field both as producer and promoter. And we all know the success story of his life and the success story that he has made of the recording industry from those rather humble beginnings. Coxon and Duke Reid were two of the main, what we then called sound system operators. They were two of the most popular. Tom the Great Sebastian was another. And today we would call them dancehall music operators. But those people were the ones who promoted the business of taking music to the people, because local radio stations were not playing Jamaican music. They were playing overseas music. So they were able to take both the imported records from the rhythm and blues era, which was not even being played on the local radio stations either, to the people as a musical idiom that they themselves wanted to hear. And when that moved out of the imported segment of popularity into local records, they were the ones who helped to make that transition, because it was their popularity with the crowd that made the patrons go to their dances where they could introduce these records. After a time, the radio stations, realizing that this was the music of the people and what was really popular, they started to play Jamaican's music. In fact, the record that had the most influence in terms of the transition from imported rhythm and blues records to the production of local music was the theme song on Jamaica Broadcasting Corporation, JBC's Teenage Dance Party, which was the first program ever to give popularity and to play records that the people wanted to hear, local and imported. And it was the revelation of the title of that record as a result of information that came to me, and as a result of which I imported the record and virtually destroyed this lucrative blank label transaction that was going on, that caused people to cease importing because I was getting too much information on what the rail records were, what the rail labels were, and then they moved into local production. That record was called Live It Up by Ernie Freeman on an Imperial label, but it was given the local name Beardman Shuffle, and that became the theme song of Teenage Dance Party. And when I found out the rail name and the rail source and imported it, that destroyed that market. And so we went on from there into the local market because that avenue was closed, and it opened the way now for local singers to get a chance to popularize their records or to popularize their compositions, because there were no records being produced of them. I produced the first one, Omanio.
Yeah. That first record, Manio, did you arrange the session and book the musicians and?
Yes, yes.
How had you got to hear about Higgs and Wilson?
I'm not quite sure, but being a part of the music industry then, someone must have told me about it. And I remember going to Ward Theatre one night because the artists used to perform there and at cinemas too. And I heard the performance of Higgs and Wilson. And then I remember asking Jackie Edwards, who composed it, to come and see me because he controlled the rights. And we made an arrangement, and then I took it into studio. I was advised what band to use and so on. All they did was reproduce what they were already singing on the circuit.
And you would have recorded that at Federal Studio?
No, it was at JBC.
At JBC, right.
But it was pressed at Federal.
About Federal now, Mr. Khoury.
Yes. Now, Khoury was the first manufacturer. He started many years, in the early 50s. But he was producing local records. They were then on 78 RPM, primarily for the tourist market, mento music, calypso music, that sort of thing. And there was a thriving market there for that. Jamaica's tourism trade was just beginning to emerge. It wasn't a really big business because there was so much imported stuff around. So he was a predecessor in the sense of the person who started the manufacturing side of the music industry. Just like Duke Reed and Coxsone and Tom the Great Sebastian were the founders of the sound system, and I was the originator of creating the opening for the Jamaican composer and the Jamaican singer to translate his music into records and produce the first records. So I suppose you can tie it all together, and that's how the whole thing started.
Yeah, that's fine.
Very good. Excuse me. Could you mention something about the copyright, your involvement in the copyright?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Late in the 1960s, I realized that Jamaican artists were not getting a fair break. Their music was being used, it was being exploited, particularly in the United Kingdom. I covered their rights on the United States side with a deal with a publishing company. I think it was Universal was the name of it, I'm not quite sure. But the music wasn't popular on that side. So I had a look at what existed then by way of copyright protection, and it certainly was inadequate. I got hold of a friend of mine in the industry who earlier had been the one who had arranged for me to get the very best labels when I was a manufacturer. Columbia, Epic, and what was then called the top rank labels, which was really a collection of 50 or so very small labels into one group. And a number of others, Imperial and Atlantic and so on. His name was Paul Marshall, very well-known attorney in the entertainment industry. And at that point we began the work on the creation of appropriate copyright legislation for Jamaica. The government changed in 1972, and not too much was done in the 1970s. I took it up back in the 1980s when I then became Prime Minister and was responsible for culture again as the portfolio that I held, and brought Paul Marshall here to Jamaica, and work began on creating a serious copyright legislation. It would dragged out during the 80s because every time we thought we had gone somewhere, we were told that there was still more. There was the Rome Convention, there was the Universal Copyright legislation or convention, and a number of other things. And it dragged on, making headway but just not reaching a finality. It finally came to a point of finality late in the 80s, early 90s, and has now been enacted into law.
I was going to say, possibly pushing my luck. It occurred to us through doing this project that from fairly humble beginnings, reggae and Jamaican culture particularly seems to have musically colonized the world. I don't know if you have any comments on that, or maybe could elaborate on that for us?
There's no question about the fact that reggae is no longer considered to be ethnic music. It doesn't occupy a slot anymore that confines it the way the rumba or the cha-cha or some Latin rhythms had a little segment of the music industry. Reggae has become part of the international music scene, not only keeping its own identity, but it has infected a much wider music listenership and even compositions. It has had the particular role of influencing the formation of what is now known as DJ music and dancehall music, and therefore can be said to have godfathered even those new musical idioms, which are quite distinct from what reggae was originally, but the whole movement has been translated into this popular protest music, popular protest rhythms, and so on, so that it has created a musical idiom that spans the world from Japan to the West. As you may or may not know, I am sponsoring the establishment of a Jamaica Music Museum, which will be able to present music not only audio-visually, but also synopses of the accomplishments and achievements of persons in the industry as composers, as singers, as producers, whatnot, so that it will be more or less like an archive of the development of our music, going back into the folk music roots and origins, because a good part of what we have today had its origin there in religious and non-religious folk music, and coming right up onto the present through reggae, through rocksteady, through dancehall, DJ music, and so on. So it will be a very comprehensive museum with the archives to back it. And I was very interested in a gift to me of a publication put out in Japan on reggae music, the likes of which does not exist anywhere in the world. It is a very thick handbook which may be an annual, with all the reggae artists in glossy, with their, I can't read it because it's in Japanese, but it has become such a widely popular music there now that it's not regarded as cult music. It's something that is here to stay. And there will be further derivatives of the music form, but that rhythm and that beat is here to stay.